You're listening to Bootstrapped Bossin by James Alexander, a mini-series showcasing some successful Irish bootstrap businesses. You won't find these CEOs perched on rooftops, smiling for a press release. They're in the engine room, making the hard decisions to achieve sustainable growth.
So, delighted to be joined by Conor O'Toole, co-founder and CTO at Loylap, a smart payment platform. Conor, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jimmy. Great to be here. Yeah. Thanks for having me down.
Pleasure, mate. And I suppose just before we start, can you maybe tell everyone what exactly Loylap do?
Sure. So we actually run two brands under our business, Loylap being one of them, targeted at SMEs. Facilipay is our kind of corporate or enterprise branding, same products. Basically, what Loylap is a closed loop cashless payment system.
Okay.
Right? We essentially provide value-added services to acquiring banks and their merchants, all delivered at the point of sale. So, I mean, when we talk about closed loop payment systems, you think about, what actually is a payment system. Generally, people be familiar with open loop systems where you'd be paying with a credit card. This is an industry kind of dominated by Visa, MasterCard, the interchange, as they call it, and everything that flows from your own bank, whether it be AIB, Bank of Ireland, et cetera, ultimately to end up in a merchant's bank account, right? Okay. So this goes through a number of different intermediaries. Where we sit within that ecosystem is we provide payment systems to people where the money is already within the system, and we can flow between consumers and the merchant in a completely customizable way.
Okay.
Right. So we essentially have a number of different products that we sell under our system, and generally people would be more familiar with us for one of these products. So we provide loyalty systems, gift cards, online ordering, self-checkout, and a kind of wider white label digital wallet system, right? So when you think about closed loop systems, the easiest way for a layperson to understand it would be a gift card system. So once money is on your gift card, you can then spend that in any way with the merchant, and that the way that money moves is where we operate. So that money is already with the merchant, and we allow, transacting, in small amounts or large amounts, or, earning bonuses or, anything beyond that within the merchant itself. And we can essentially customize everything about that experience.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So, I mean, broadly speaking, our platform is set up the way it is, ultimately to give merchants that extra, those extra value-added services at the point of sale. Generally, if you set up a physical presence business, first thing you do is set up your point of sale. It's generally sold to you by an acquiring bank, also called merchant banks. And these guys essentially sell you the technology, the card reader, sometimes the full point of sale. And what we do is partner with those banks to provide additional services that a merchant generally wants. So usually, it's that extra, we provide the plural to merchant services, where traditionally it is just a payment acceptance service. We now allow merchant banks to give their merchants extra things. So, come in, get a gift card system that works with your point of sale, get a loyalty system, customize it how you want. Build and customize your entire interface.
Okay. So you'd partner with sort of the pillar Irish banks, for example, in terms of how they service their customers?
In a way. So, I mean, if you look at Ireland and most countries in general, what consumers like you or I would be familiar with would be the Bank of Ireland, the AIB, Ulster Bank, exiting Ireland, et cetera. Those are consumer banks. On the merchant side, there's a lot fewer of them. In Ireland, I think there's 4 players. So we're talking Bank of Ireland Payment Services, and then we've got AIB MS, which is AIB Merchant Services. Then you also have Elevon, WorldPay, and those are kind of the main players in the market. So it's sort of, they kind of match up. They're analogous with the consumer banks, but not always.
Okay.
There's a lot less of them. In the UK, I think I can't remember exactly, don't quote me on this, call it 10 of them. In the US, there's only a handful as well. And that is essentially our market.
Okay, understood. Well, I suppose what you've been doing's maybe changed a lot, because you've been around for 10 years now, since 2012.
Yeah.
It's pretty long for a bootstrap business by all accounts.
It's certainly a milestone this year. April we turned 10.
Congrats.
It feels like it just went by in a flash, really.
Yeah, and can we talk about how it started?
Absolutely. So back in 2012, myself and my business partner, Patrick Gary, we've been friends for a very long time.
Yeah.
We've, started other businesses together in the past. And we always used to go down, I think it was a Friday after work, to the Schoolhouse Hotel just off the canal there in Dublin for pints. And we'd inevitably get talking about business. And it was always, bumping around ideas, most of them rubbish. And it ended up, a few weeks went by and we kept coming back. We usually just slate different businesses that were out there.
Okay.
And at that time, the big one on everyone's lips was Groupon.
Yeah.
And we sort of looked at Groupon and we were like, this is great. I use Groupon all the time. As a consumer, I love it. I love getting discounts. I love, all of that. And Groupon had essentially positioned itself as, I suppose, a way to get new customers and increase your revenue, basically. Yeah. Now, once you dug into it a little bit more, you realize that actually Groupon was just costing businesses a huge amount. And I've got family members, friends who would run cafes or restaurants or any sort of small business. And you realize at a point that, Groupon was often costing these businesses somewhere between 40 and 60% on a discounted product. So they were essentially running these deals as a loss.
Okay.
Expecting customers to kind of come back after they got their first experience and loved it. And the fact of the matter is that no one, or barely anyone ever did. So we kind of looked at this and, we thought Groupon is huge now, billion dollar business plus, but they're really, and their clients are merchants who pay them, but merchants are being, essentially, I suppose encouraged to, run this at a loss. And, we sort of thought about where is the actual value in this? So, we were talking about different things. We also talked about, for us at the time, the big thing was, how do payments work? And it's something that, I'm a bit of a payments nerd now, so.
You'd have to be.
Yeah, once you actually try and understand how money moves in a simple experience, which is now just, you tap your card and you leave a cafe, it's done. But once you actually dig into how that works and who makes money at the different pieces, the acquiring bank takes a fee, never costs the consumer anything because otherwise they wouldn't use it. They just pay with cash. Mm-hmm. But the merchant bank pays fees to the interchange, MasterCard, Visa, they pay fees to the consumer bank. Ultimately the merchant covers it all. And generally it probably costs a merchant somewhere in between, with traditional acquiring banks, somewhere between 1% and, if you use something like Stripe, up to, about 3% per transaction, plus a flat fee of, up to about 30 cents or so. So, we kind of broke that down and figured, listen, can't we do something better here? And we were really interested in this idea of a better payment experience that actually suited merchants and, filled that gap. It's a huge industry dominated, like I said, by MasterCard, Visa, very difficult to tap into. And, we sort of thought about this, holistically and tried to figure out, at the time we were looking at different pieces that we could do well. We were, sort of obsessed with, customer retention. But we had a wider sort of idea of, doing loyalty, gift, payments, offers at the time. That's kind of, transformed itself a little bit. But to get into a space that wide was very, very difficult. We did see a value in providing, full featured service like that, But at the time, and all the advice we got was simplify, focus on something small. And we ended up starting with the loyalty side of it, hence the name of our SME business. So this was in about 2012. Paddy was working at the time for Deutsche Bank.
Yeah.
I was working with Accenture. And we'd thought about this a lot, decided to start with the loyalty, started walking around with questionnaires, went to different businesses, did the door-to-door stuff, and really built out the idea from there, built out interest, had, connections with merchants all across Dublin. And eventually, we decided to kind of take that dive.
How long in from when you were kind of doing all that research to actually saying, right, we're quitting our jobs and we're going in?
I think, for us, I think both of us were a little bit disillusioned with the work that we were doing. Probably a bit arrogant as well at the time, 24 years old, you're bulletproof, you're always right. Yeah. Everyone else is always wrong.
Best time to start a business then.
Best time to start a business, but also a really awful time to be working for, say, a consultant at the time, in the middle of, a banking crisis where your job was to go in and essentially figure out how to fire people.
Right, okay. And like George Clooney and Up in the Air, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. And probably not to that extent, but it sort of felt like that. And you just, I've always sort of felt like a little bit of a cog in that environment. You have ideas, what do you do with them? Mm-hmm. I remember my, in Accenture, there's like a hot desk space at the time. And, I would have been working in kind of a PMO role for one of the Irish banks. And, you'd be doing your day-to-day job and, my mind would always be churning and you'd come up with an idea. And my desk just happened to be next to the managing director of Ireland. And I remember, putting together a presentation once about what essentially, I'd never had any experience in it before, but what would have essentially been a kind of corporate incubator. And, I remember walking into him and, just off the cuff, like, who does this? Some sort of graduate, going in with this, little presentation that I'd done on PowerPoint and handing it to him and saying, this is something that, Accenture should really be doing. And, didn't really get much of a nod. And, that sort of thing was a little bit sort of disheartening. Yeah. And you feel that obviously at that age, you're the smartest person in the room. And, we really wanted to do something. So I suppose from that, those initial conversations were probably kind of early in the year 2012. We ended up incorporating in April 2012, which with hindsight, and we can get back into it, but was probably a bit too early for us. And beyond that, we started, like everyone does, with a pitch deck and, trying to raise money. And we started going around to VCs, etc. And actually, that kind of snowballed a little bit and we started building things. And it was probably about 2 or 3 months before, from incorporation to actually, leaving our job, given a 30-day notice period and all of that.
So sorry to interrupt, but why was it too early to incorporate?
I feel like, part of our story, and I feel like, the fundraising process is all about that story. Mm-hmm. And being able to build that narrative is a really important aspect of any business. And I think, even now, we say we've been in business for 10 years, but really we've only been trading for probably 7 or 8. Okay. So it took a solid amount of time to actually build an MVP, test it, rebuild it, get it into people's hands, and then, probably 2 or 3 years before anyone paid us a cent.
Wow.
And that was...
How are you funding it?
At the very start, it was ourselves.
Wow.
We self-funded it. I put, my very meager life savings into it.
Yeah.
Hired a couple of developers for a few months out of that, got things moving. And then eventually we started to get wise to the different aspects of funding that are sort of available to startups. We started it was Launchpad 8, I think at the time, which was run by the NDRC. Yeah. They used to operate until recently out of Dublin 8. They've now been taken over by Dog Patch Labs.
Yeah.
And, you know, that was our first kind of incubator. And I think they gave us something like 15 grand or something. Okay. And that was, when was that? So that was September 2013, I believe. Okay. So we're talking... So
that's from nearly over 12 months.
Over 12 months.
Yeah, okay, wow.
So, I mean, you know, that was a very tough time, you know, between quitting the job, realizing that this is something that we needed to do for ourselves, you know, at that time, you know, being young, like I say, bulletproof, very little to lose, you know, going through a few knocks, you know, failing a lot of times, rejigging the idea, going back out there. It did take a lot of time. I think with hindsight, we probably could have done things a lot leaner and a lot more efficiently with a bit more planning. But, you know, that's how these things go. You learn.
Yeah.
You live and learn.
Yeah. So it kind of sounds like there was a lot of push factors in terms of working for the man, but also there was a problem that you both just really wanted to solve as well. So it wasn't necessarily wanting to leave employment or the pool of entrepreneurship. It was a bit of both.
And I mean, like I said, you know, Paddy and I both, we started a business with another friend of ours, Adam Gain, a few years before, where we had essentially set up an art dealership to sell Zimbabwean sculptures.
Cool.
I'm from Zimbabwe originally, as you know, and, you know, we, you know, fallen in love with some of these incredible sculptures in Zimbabwe, and we ended up shipping back a number of, you know, pieces from really well-known artists and essentially selling them, at fine art fairs and, you know, galleries, and actually still have quite a lot of them in the house.
So it was a success.
we definitely made our money back.
Okay.
And you know these little kind of learning experiences that you take from everything. And I think, you know, having those little, you know, those short, you know, jabs at actually building a business, making money is really important. And I think a lot of that is kind of missed, particularly in the software industry. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, people tend not to build a business. They tend to build a brand. You know, a lot of people don't even build a product. You know, they tend to just, you know, build PR. And I find, you know, this is something that we kind of learned the hard way, partly out of naivety. But I also think it was, you know, a really important part of us, you know, sustaining a business for, you know, technically 10 years, but, you know, still going. And, you know, I feel like probably we wouldn't be here today if it hadn't gone the way it had.
Okay, brilliant. So Conor, in terms of, like I said, being a bootstrap business, I'm sure you've had to make some pretty hard financial decisions or difficult financial decisions along the way. I mean, Definitely. Is there any particular story that comes to mind, or stories?
God, I mean, it's a constant balancing act, is the reality of, you know, bootstrap business. I mean, you have to manage cash flows, you know, in a way, you know, a lot of my background would be accounting. And, you know, I suppose understanding how a business functions has always been important. For us, I mean, you know, very early on, before I even left Accenture, we went out with that business plan and we went to a couple of VCs, right? And, you know, they listened to us. They're very good. I remember John Flynn, I think, from ACT Venture Capital. You know, we sat down with them for a while. We, you know, had a great conversation, you know, very open to ideas, but they could obviously tell how inexperienced we were. Mm-hmm. But that was a real learning curve for us. And, you know, we sort of, I feel like we sort of went back to the drawing board a little bit after that and tried to refine our idea, which, you know, I mean, we knew from the very start that what we were trying to build was very complex. And, you know, I think one of the concepts behind it is that everything, you know, all of these different payment services would need to be interlinked to provide the value that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's always been and continues to be a challenge for us because we have so many competitors. And, you know, if you say, you know, a lot of people just think that we are a loyalty company, which we do loyalty, but it's just a very, you know, it's one of, you know, 5 different products we offer. And it, people are like, oh, you do loyalty, and therefore, are these your competitors? These competitors? And yes, well, there are plenty. There are hundreds, in fact, on the loyalty side of competitors. Makes it very difficult, and that has kind of driven us to, partly, we didn't want to just be a loyalty company. We didn't want to just be a gift card company. We saw them as essentially the same thing. And when it comes to the technical infrastructure, they essentially are. In terms of challenges, those first couple of years were extremely difficult. We were working on the business essentially full time during the day. I would have been doing waiting jobs at night. I spent essentially, the guts of 2-3 years without a stable income, which you can probably do when you're 24, and it's okay. I definitely wouldn't be able to do it now. And that was probably the hardest, part of it. You're working all day and all night. And, that's just for sheer love of what you want to do. And, this vision that you're trying to, trying to bring to fruition.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people can do that. And I think, that's where funding comes into it. And, again, there was a little bit of naivety there. We probably would do it differently, or a little bit more streamlined if we could do it again. And I know, Paddy did the same. He was, it was very hard those first few years, but we had to make it work.
Yeah.
It was either that or a failure, and neither of us wanted to fail. And you still don't. You kind of, you get very protective over what you've built, the time you've put into it, and it's very hard to quantify.
Yeah.
But extremely challenging
So
in those
you
early days.
kind of went to look for funding, weren't able to get it, but you were like, we're still going to do this.
These days, I have a list on my computer of probably 100 VC names and contact information. I didn't have this back then. We figured, oh, listen, we'll just pop into the first one. Yeah. We find they'll give us 100 mil and, we're off to the races. But, that was the naivety of it. And, we didn't really have, and when I say we went to the VCs, that was before we had a product, before we had anything to show for it.
Okay.
And I don't think, certainly that doesn't work in Ireland. I feel like VC in Ireland does not mean the same thing that VC means in the States. And when you look at all the stories, when you look at entrepreneurship, you listen to podcasts, you read books, everything talks about VC with a US mindset. And that doesn't really translate to Ireland. Okay. I think VCs in Ireland tend to look for more of a proven idea. And that was the big thing that we came out of some of those meetings with, was that we needed a product in people's hands and we needed people paying for it before we could actually prove its value and prove our value as, founders to anyone that would potentially invest in us.
Okay.
So we did start it. We kind of cut that off very early and we said, okay, we need to actually build something.
Seems like the world's kind of come back to this point now where an idea alone won't get you funding and you actually need to have a product that people are paying for.
I think so. And, I'll talk about, a little bit about, what we've learned tonight. If we were to do this all again, I almost wouldn't start with the product. I would start with the billing. And that's something that it took us a very, very long time.
When you say billing, sorry, what do you mean?
How do you charge people for your services?
Right, okay.
Right, and it sounds simple. It sounds, basic, but the reality of it is, you always want to, particularly in the software industry, you want to build something that people pay for without you having to contact them. Because running that kind of accounts receivable process is a full-time job. And particularly as a small company with, small number of people who are generally specialized at IT or sales or something like that, you don't want them on the phone all day, every day, calling up people, where's that 15 euros you owe me? Like, it's just not worth it. Okay. So the economies, have to start at that point, and then they kind of filter back. Obviously you have to have a product, you have to have an idea for something, but if I was to strip everything out and do it again, and this is a part of what we did during COVID, was actually look at the business And it took us a very long time. I mean, COVID was, I suppose, nearly 3 years ago, but, it took us a good 3 or 4 years to actually figure out, listen, we need to stop. And, in some ways, COVID was a gift because, when you're running a business, when people rely on you to be up live 24/7, you have to keep things on, and going back to the start is something almost impossible to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was probably a little gift that COVID gave us that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Nice. Obviously, bootstrapping, hiring would be one of the biggest challenges. You mentioned you had 2 really early hires that have been pivotal to your business today, but what was that like at the start? How were you able to attract people against the likes of an Accenture or the other high-paying, sort of employers?
Absolutely. I mean, this has been a problem, or a challenge for us from the early days. And I mean, we when we started off, like I said, I invested all of my money into hiring a couple of graduate developers for a few months. We gave them a little bit of equity as well. I mean, in the early stages, we definitely made a lot of mistakes. We weren't paying ourselves. We paid a couple of, junior guys who were, didn't have any kind of industry experience, got an MVP out. It was great. It suited that time of the business. Then we moved, when we got into the NDRC, that was our kind of first opportunity to actually work with other people and start kind of thinking holistically about the business itself and, how it should grow, how it should look. And with the NDRC, we got about, I think it was about 15,000 euros. I'd have to look back, but roughly that.
Okay.
And we hired 2, again, junior guys, Sean Deverell and Dan Wilson, who, we started and, very much founders in their own right. They've been with us since the very, very start. We wouldn't be here without them. Great guys, huge, tech heads. They had a lot of that sort of technical experience that we didn't necessarily have.
Okay.
And I suppose one of the very early lessons we learned was that both of us, Paddy and myself, come from a finance background. I've always been a bit of a tech nerd anyway. And we sort of discovered early on that we needed that expertise in-house, because if you're building software, if that's your product, you have to own that, from an IP perspective and from a maintenance perspective. You cannot be reliant on an outsider, who, doesn't, I don't know, maybe he goes off, maybe he's sick, maybe he just decides not to work one day, and are you going to place your entire business's success on that?
Yeah.
So we decided very early on that, I would take care of the technology side, Paddy would take care of sales and marketing. And then we started to really build the product. And that for me was a big learning curve. I mean, I'm essentially self-taught developer. I kind of work mostly on the architecture and infrastructure. And then, the guys that we bring in, Dan at the time is an Android guru. Sean, absolute demon on iOS, has sort of migrated more to a kind of management position these days. Okay. They're still with us, and I think what we learned, particularly from those guys, is the value of good people.
Yeah.
And not necessarily people who are just looking for that salary bump. And this has sort of shaped the way that we hire over the years, and in a lot of different ways. For example, whenever I look at a CV, and I probably look at 5 CVs a week, let's say,
Okay.
There's a constant influx from different people. I get at least 2 emails a day from recruiters.
Wow.
It's a very busy space, and for me, I know I feel kind of bad saying it, but when I look at a CV, I will read it within 2 minutes, right? Because I know exactly what I'm looking for. And generally when we hire, particularly on the tech side, we tend to hire junior people, which is a little bit unusual.
Very much so, yeah.
And the reasoning is because it's not always been the case, and we have made mistakes. I mean, I hired a guy once with 20 years experience. We thought, listen, we need to get some serious knowledge in here. We need to really spice things up. And, he left within a couple of months. Okay. We were just a stepping stone for him, temporary, a gap filler on his CV, and at the end of the day, we paid him a fortune, and we still don't have a single line of code, I'd say, that he wrote for us in I don't know, 5 months or something.
Okay, right.
So we tend to find that, if you give an opportunity to the right junior person, you can build a level of trust that you won't necessarily get from someone, from job hoppers who are out there. We've also found that, the technologies that we use, even someone with 20 years experience, we're talking, a lot of our stack would be Node, React, et cetera. And these technologies have only been around for 6 or 7 years. So someone with 6 or 7 years is as experienced in that particular technology as you're going to get. So looking at, yes, you're going to have other developers with wider experience and they're going to know how to work within a technology team, and they can bring, other kind of soft skills to it. But, as a software business, if you look at our P&L, our expenses are people, right? And so to drive a profitable business for us is about driving efficiencies in the people that we hire.
Okay.
It's probably 60, 70% of our spend. So it really makes, every hire we make is done very, very carefully. And we tend to prefer to make those mistakes at a junior level, find the right people, make sure they're a fit, and then train them in the way that we want them to work.
Yeah.
Because it takes even a senior person trying to learn your stack, trying to learn your code base, it takes time. You're talking 2 or 3 months before anyone can really be beneficial to a team. So it is an investment, both monetarily, but more importantly, from an experience point of view. If someone comes into the company, you have to train them, and it doesn't matter what level they're at, they have to learn from the other people on your team.
Yeah.
And that is the big expense for us, taking someone out of something, productive in terms of the actual product set and putting them onto, training someone else to eventually be productive as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So we found that doing that for kind of junior people has been more effective. This is anecdotal for us, but it's also, I've seen it happen more times than not. We've tried everything. We've made a lot of mistakes in the past. I also find that in Ireland, it's very, very difficult to hire tech staff, simply because, you have a business like ours. We employ about 30 people at the moment. Getting experienced tech staff, you're competing with Amazon, AWS, you're competing with Facebook, Google, all of these guys who are going to graduates. They're offering them enormous salaries essentially to sit on a phone as tech support. So a lot of people will take that, and I've got nothing against that. People have to live. Finding that work-life balance is amazing, and we try to encourage that in our own team. But particularly as a junior developer, the most important thing you can do with your career is actually get involved in technology. And one of the things that I look for in a CV is always people, and you can tell very quickly from a CV whether people have an actual interest in technology. Yeah. And it's the same reason why I don't necessarily look for qualifications, and I always look for a portfolio. It's the first thing I'll always click on in a CV is a GitHub portfolio, a personal website, examples of projects, and I love digging through people's code, because most people think you're not going to look at their code. Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. If it's clean, if you're commenting, let's say your own code, that's a really good indicator of, how organized your mind is. And, those are kind of just key little things that I think make people stand out.
Yeah.
So we tend to hire, I think, the very best at that level and invest a lot of our time, energy and money into making those people the best that they can be.
Yeah. And that, goes against the grain a bit in terms of that sort of ship as fast as you can mentality that kind of exists at the moment. So, and again, I think it's a great tip for any other founder listening or aspiring founder that, wants to bootstrap it, that actually invest in because from what you're saying, maybe the ramp up from a junior and a senior is not too dissimilar.
Yeah, I mean, definitely you're going to hire a senior and they will know probably how to be part of a team. And I think, if we had raised, $1 million at the very start, we probably would have done things a little bit differently, and probably built a team structure around more senior people, and it would have worked very well. I think with a limited budget, you have to find that balance between actually getting a product out the door and getting a good product in place. And you have to make a trade-off at some point, and it's always going to be speed, quality, and cost. You can have two, but you can never have three, in my experience.
Yeah.
So, if you want something quick, you have to, either build it quick and dirty, Facebook's old mantra, or you can spend a lot, get really good quality, but it is a balance. And, for us, we're aware of that. I think as a payment system, security is hugely important to us, and that's something that we never compromise on. But, we're also aware that a consumer using our system, they don't care, specifically how, if something reacts within 20 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds, like it doesn't really make that much of a difference. And those are kind of the, minutiae of the decisions that we sometimes have to make.
Okay.
There is always time to go back and, and build on things and make things better. But it is important to get things in people's hands, because ultimately that's how you make money. And for us, the speed of getting people to pay us, the speed of getting, new customers in the door, retaining existing customers, that's what keeps us functioning. And that, as a bootstrap business, I think you arrive at that point much quicker than if you have this enormous war chest at the start to go on. And I think that's been very good for us. I feel like probably if we got a huge amount of money in the early days, we would have probably wasted a lot of it very quickly.
Okay.
And probably not be here today.
Okay. And so, how long then did it take to go from self-funded to customer funded?
It probably took, for us from a funding perspective, we did, put our own money into it, put our own time into it. It's unusual, and, probably advise against doing it. But, for a lot of the time we paid people more than ourselves. In fact, we didn't pay ourselves for a long time.
Yeah.
After we were paying everyone else that was working for us. And I think, this is part of why particularly some of the guys that have been with us for a long time, like us, because they can see, that we are invested in this. We're not here, to take advantage of them, because otherwise we'd be taking advantage of ourselves first. Yeah. And that sort of trust filters down. I do see, people notice it and people appreciate it. But yeah, for us, funding has come, it started with that self-funded. We did, the friends and family round, got a little bit of money from, from some family. And then we started making money pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And we started looking at all of the other avenues for raising money that didn't involve equity.
Okay.
And the reality is, this is a full-time job. Like, raising money is a full-time job. And generally, as a founder, particularly for me on the tech side, I've always been very interested in getting, product out the door. And, I think we sort of misunderstood how difficult it is to raise financing, and, to keep redoing those presentations, keep redoing your pitch deck, keeping it up to date. Making it look great, because impression is everything. Yeah.
You need a marketing person for that.
You do. And a designer even. Yeah. I remember getting, one of the big things that came out of the NDRC was actually, it was the first time working with a designer on just our brand. And the leap from having, a very dirty MVP that, I still got images of it now. We look at it and laugh, because it is hilarious. And then working with a designer, and all of a sudden that impression, is, totally different. And that filters through, from everyone from, yourselves, your merchants, and ultimately kind of investors and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, once we did that, it probably took us, I'd say 2 years post MVP to make a profit. And since then, it's been
That's
very
pretty
much
good for a product company.
It is, and I think like I said, we wouldn't have got there. We're probably talking, that's the guts of 4 years, I'd say, from incorporation, which like I said, we probably did a little bit too early.
Yeah.
And this is why it's kind of hard to sort of quantify, because that sounds like a really long time, but there's also a huge amount of time there where we weren't really doing anything, massively productive. And, people kind of look at that and there is an impression that's given off by that, which doesn't really, reflect the reality. I'd say it was probably, 2 years for us to turn around a profit. And I think that was a very important milestone for us, because that showed us exactly what our trajectory could be. And, we started to learn about the different nuts and bolts of our particular business. And software, in a lot of ways, you need to think of as a business, like, just the same as if you were, I don't know, making, notepads and selling notepads. Like, you have to have, cost, revenue, and you have to make a profit. Otherwise, it's going nowhere. And that is, I think, the difference between, that's probably the core difference between, I suppose, essentially raising, VC or equity funding, which gives you that leeway and that, that time, I suppose, to not have to think about really the underlying business behind it.
So Conor, how would you describe what is your perception, I should say, of the overall funding environment in Ireland and Europe globally? And let's talk about VC. Let's talk about what's available to people, through their local bodies like Enterprise Ireland, for example. What's been your experience?
So, if you look at funding a business, there's generally two approaches you take. So you have, essentially equity, and this is kind of the world that the VC fits in, and you have debt financing, and this, this can come from anywhere. Personal, investment, people could come from institutions or banks. Very much the VC world is obsessed with essentially the story. You look at the VC model is invest in 10, one will succeed.
Yeah.
So, the flip side of that is that even if you convince a venture capitalist to back your business, their, I suppose, mindset is that there's a 90% chance this is going to fail anyway, right? And, for me, when we kind of realized that, we sort of started to look at what else was out there. We very much, needed money to grow the team, grow the product, and grow our customer base. But we also needed experience. Like I said, the payments industry is huge. It's dominated by behemoths. And, we needed, a way to, I suppose, sustain ourselves in that environment. We ultimately decided to look at, I suppose, broadly speaking, we've generally financed our business through debt. And over the years, we've taken out loans, we've, paid them all back. And this kind of feeds back onto itself, because, once you're talking to banks, the very first loans that you take are all self-guaranteed. Whatever assets you have as an individual are on the line. So, whether you take 50 grand, 200 grand, whatever it is from a bank, you're essentially signing a piece of paper that says, if you don't pay this back, they'll take your house or whatever. And that's a huge, that's a huge milestone. It is a huge risk. And I think, it is a founder's responsibility to balance that risk. VC money is essentially equity. They're essentially giving it to you. It moves that risk from yourself as a founder to the VC. If you go out of business, sure, big deal. But, the VC has kind of factored that into their model. And that's how they raise these funds. They expect, one of their 10 is going to be a unicorn or whatever the case may be. And that works for them. And it works for a lot of businesses. And, by no means am I saying one is better than the other. I think there's definitely a place for all of these different models, and it's very much a choice that an entrepreneur or founder has to make. Obviously, from a risk perspective, the VC side is very attractive to a founder, and there are a huge number of benefits to it as well. You're looking at, financiers, which is ultimately their job, are going to be backing your business. You're going to get a lot of PR out of it, and that PR is going to feed directly into growth. I find, there's a cynical side of me, and I hope it doesn't come off too much, but I do find that, once you go down that route, it's not necessarily about building a business, but it is about building a brand. And the VCs who are backing your business are not necessarily looking at ultimately selling your product. What they're looking at doing is selling their stake in your product. So, and it's a very, very key distinction, because the cynical side of me is saying that, they're not really that interested in your product. They're interested in what you can do to sell people on the idea of your product so that they can exit and make their money back, right? Okay. Plus some. And, for us, that was a key part of why we sort of stopped looking for investment from those channels, is because we knew we needed help in this enormous industry. We knew we didn't just need the money. We needed introductions. We needed, we needed to meet people. We needed, the right sort of experience from the right sort of people. And so we started looking at other avenues. And I think one of the most important and powerful things that we have in Ireland is Enterprise Ireland. And I have to say, people have, gripes with them, but I think it is probably one of the most fantastic resources that we have. They've supported us, from very early stages in, incrementing ways, and, everything from, innovation vouchers where you can, I suppose you get about $5,000 to put towards, you have to pay it, Enterprise Ireland essentially give you a voucher to pay to a third level institution, okay, and you can get people in to do certain things. And
for like R&D and stuff like that?
Pretty much. And for us as a business, because we didn't take VC money, it allowed us to do a lot more experimentation. Mm-hmm. And we've tried a million different things over the years. Most things don't work. Most ideas don't go anywhere. Some of them do. And you learn how to filter those ones out very quickly. And having these resources like the innovation voucher, is very useful for, I think, one of the first ones we used was for some AI expertise, okay, to come in and have a look at, because we collect a huge amount of data, but we don't really do anything with it, beyond give it back to the merchants who essentially own the data under GDPR. But, there is, a huge amount of stuff there that we can do. And, things like the innovation voucher allowed us to bring people in to think of new ways to, to use that, to, experiment with it, make smarter models. We tried to build out a loyalty system that essentially is designed to, use, machine learning to identify people who, customers who are going to lapse before they lapse. And that was a really, really cool thing that we built out, and it works. Yeah.
Like a churn model, basically.
It's essentially a churn predictor. That's what we call it. Nice. And that was really fun to do. It's, it's a part of our stack. It's very hard to sell that to an SME. Mm-hmm. They don't really, care at the end of the day. Are they going to pay for it? they care theoretically, but they don't fully understand it. They don't really, they're definitely not going to pay for it. Yeah. Maybe at an enterprise level, you would get that. So, that's something that we've banked. We've used other things.
You've got in the notes I've got here, you've played the Enterprise Ireland game really well. When I speak to other founders, some have really struggled. They maybe have done one piece of funding, and then there's 4 or 5 things that you've gotten out of them, which is brilliant.
So there's a few things that Enterprise Ireland do, and certainly in the early days we tried to engage with them in ways that weren't very successful. So if you look at the way that they kind of stage funding, they have certain aspects. One of them is the New Frontiers program, which is essentially designed specifically for startups with just an idea on paper, right? And they'll give you it's kind of like an incubator. They'll give you about 15 grand, office space, et cetera, to start exploring that. We never got that. We tried to get it, we never got that. There's also the high potential startup. HPSU funds. So that is essentially designed, to follow on from that.
Did you get that?
We didn't get that.
Okay.
So again, we tried that again.
Yeah. This was still pre-revenue days.
We tried HPSU sort of after revenue for sure. Again, it kind of feeds back into that idea that, fundraising is a full-time job. And you have to go and present to them. You have to have all of these, all of this material ready, and all of that time, particularly from a small team, when you're trying to build a business, is time spent, investing in, I suppose the look of it, the feel of it, and presenting it to other people. And we have found that a challenge in the past, particularly when you've got customer calling you on one line and then you've got a presentation in an hour, and trying to find that balance is very difficult.
Yeah.
So I find that we have kind of used our time with Enterprise Ireland in the latter years much better. So, I mean, certain things there are, the R&D tax credits is something that we avail of. Like I said, a lot of our business is experimentation. And this is essentially a way to spend money on, essentially R&D activities and claim that back as tax. I mean, like I said, like people are our biggest expense, second is tax.
Okay.
And part of that is obviously paying tax on people's, on people themselves. Yeah. And Enterprise Ireland, in conjunction with Revenue, run this R&D tax credit system where you can claim up to 25% of your expenses back on R&D activities. Again, it's a bit time consuming to actually put together and track, but we have all those systems in place.
Great.
To track people's time, so that becomes a much easier job.
So that's a portion of salaries then. If you've got staff dedicated to R&D, you can
pretty
claim
much
back. Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't be a full person's salary, but it would certainly be part of their salary that they spend on specific R&D activities. I suppose the other thing that we've availed of, which has been extremely useful from Enterprise Ireland, is the Grad Start program. And now this fits in very well with our kind of hiring mantra of, bringing in juniors, training them up, encouraging them to be the best they can be. The Grad Start program allows you to hire graduates. I think it's within 2 years of graduation, and Enterprise Ireland will, fund a portion of their paycheck. And this has been great for us. I mean, we've used it a couple of times. It's a really good way to, to get good talent in, and without spending a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
I suppose the other big thing then, I suppose, that we have availed of is the ERDF, which is the European Regional Development Fund, which is something that's kind of, it's sort of momentary. It's actually a European-wide fund that essentially is debt that is guaranteed by the European Union.
Is that the thing that's up to like 900,000 or something?
Yes, it can be quite a lot. Obviously, this is like big kind of business stuff. You have to get into a lot more detail.
The paperwork involved is
huge, and it's also matched. So you have to find funding through whatever means elsewhere, and then you can avail of your, Enterprise Ireland will assess your case and look at it. Now, we've been very, very lucky with our, with our counterpart in Enterprise Ireland, our advisor. We've had a couple of the years who've been really great to us.
Okay.
And I think that that's part of it as well, is actually engaging with them openly and honestly. I don't know how many other countries in Europe have this sort of resource, and it's something that, yes, we did find it very difficult in the early days to engage with them, in a way that we, thought we should, but certainly as the years go on, we have a bit more of a track record. They can see this, and it's been extremely beneficial for us.
Okay. Well, it's a great point. And, I think when people have struggled with Enterprise Ireland, historically, it's in the early days, and then they probably just maybe shun the relationship thinking that's how it's going to be moving forward, but actually sticking with it and investing
Definitely.
in it and actually putting the time in yourself.
And it can be demoralizing.
Yeah.
I mean, you might spend a week, putting together a presentation that you pour everything into. And, you got to get the financials together. It has to be an ongoing, it has to be an ongoing effort. And there's a lot of administration that comes with it. It's very difficult to do when you're trying to build and sell a product, to actually create that space within your day to actually, to go back and to do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
We've become better at it over the years. And, that kind of feeds back into the different tools that we use, project management tools, et cetera. I mean, there's no single piece of work that gets done in our company without it being tracked somewhere.
Okay.
And, having those systems in place is a huge benefit. And I mean, this is one of the things we did, not quite the project management stuff, but more generally, over COVID, was actually looking at the efficiencies of our business as a business. Again, kind of looking internally, how can we do things better? How can we cut out the wasted effort? And, we put in place another, number of tools to help with that, I suppose bringing in different software to automate things where, you don't have to use them. Things like Xero, for instance, like accounting software. I mean, it's probably everyone uses Xero at this point, but being able to do that pretty much automates a lot of your accounting overhead.
Yeah.
And, that cuts out, I used to do the accounts in an Excel sheet. And I mean, that would take probably 2 days at the end of every month. And that was probably me just doing the very bare minimum.
Yeah.
So again, that's a full-time job, but Excel is, nightmare to deal with at scale. Wouldn't be able to do it now. I mean, that would take a full-time accountant to do.
Yeah. So do you have a dedicated accountant, or is it just Xero plus?
We use the tools like Xero, and there's other software for different financing activities like equity management, payroll, that sort of thing. So we do have software in place for that. But then we outsource our accounting and bookkeeping activities to a consulting firm in Ireland, and they sort of come in. They've got essentially a part-time accountant who deals with our with us as a client and uses those tools on our behalf, to make sure we have like a monthly finance meeting, for instance, and that's just a chance for kind of management to get together, look at where everything is, make sure everything's going to plan, make sure the budgets are in place, and managing that really closely.
Okay.
And this is one of the things I think, a lot of people would probably miss, particularly early or young founders, let's say, is actually getting into the nuts and bolts of what is a business and how to run a business efficiently. And, like I said, our billing, platform was something that we, again, if I was to start the business again, that is where I'd start. I would look at how we bill our merchants, how we take money in the door, and to make it remove as much manual activity from it as possible.
Okay.
Because again, that's a full-time job, chasing up accounts receivable. It's, it's a pain in the ass. You don't really want to be doing that. You want to be getting on with, what makes you money, not, worrying about who owes you 15, 30 quid here or there.
Yeah.
So
at scale, that's a lot of work.
Yeah. And I mean, you can do it for maybe 100 customers, maybe 200, and then it becomes a full-time job. And then, if you keep going down that route, you need an entire division of people to manage it.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the things that we kind of looked at in detail over COVID. We sort of knew there was going to be time. There are systems out there to manage billing. You look at the likes of like ChargeBee, et cetera. But we looked at all those systems. There's nothing out there that was able to manage the way that we bill customers, which is we have about 8 different, dynamic points where we charge people different transaction fees, SaaS fees, monthly, free allowances, et cetera. Our business model is, I suppose, it essentially copies the acquiring business model. So if you have a payment terminal in your business, you pay a SaaS fee, plus you pay transaction fees, and you have free allowances, you pay flat fees on top of your transaction fees. That's very similar to how we work. But there's no system out there that essentially manages that out of the box. So we built that entire platform ourselves, and that's something that, we put a developer on it for about 18 months.
During COVID.
Yeah. And that, it's hugely beneficial for us. That sends out reminder emails, it charges people either via direct debit or credit card. And I wish we'd done that at the start. It would have been a lot easier.
Sounds like something you can commercialize and sell.
It probably is. And our end goal is, at some stage to, build this out. I imagine, at some point, an acquiring bank is going to look at us, very closely, realize how much value we actually provide to them, and, maybe come to us with an offer. And, that's, this is part of it. We have this entire billing platform behind the scenes that's essentially built for an acquiring business and automates it all, which is interesting. Maybe we'll see. We'll see what comes out.
We'll get to the vision part in a while now. I don't want to finish too soon. But look, we've talked about all the hard parts of bootstrapping, Conor, and thanks for your candor on that.
Sure.
Let's talk about the fun stuff, like the autonomy. What have been some of the highlights, that you think you would have only got from bootstrapping?
Oh my God. At the end of the day, everything that we do is, about building something better for people. And there's nothing more rewarding than seeing people use and love your software. And, obviously that feedback comes from, merchants or individuals. And, that is hugely rewarding. And I love that kind of, that feeling you get after you nail a contract or really solve someone's problem. Right. And there's, certain clients we have, like, one recently is a sort of resort in Texas, and they run, it's essentially a festival that runs every year. We've made their entire, festival completely cashless. And that means, it's everything from, once you walk in the door, you top up your account, and now you're just walking around the festival paying with your wristband. And seeing that entire thing in action at scale, is hugely rewarding. And knowing that you've, like, every, I suppose, minute of sweat that you've poured into it, seeing people use it, seeing the fun that people are having, seeing how easy it is, that's incredible. And there's no better feeling, honestly, than than seeing something come off like that. It's amazing. Those are kind of the big wins, particularly when, you get a big client come in, and you can actually see, how it affects them, and then obviously making the money from it. We're not messing around here. At the end of the day, this is a business. We have to make money. We have to make profit. And actually seeing that money hit your bank account, and knowing, being able to control exactly where that goes, and seeing every one of the decisions you've made along the way result in that is hugely rewarding. And as a bootstrap business, that's probably true of every business. As a bootstrap business, I think, one of the things for me that's great is seeing all of the people whose lives that we've touched or changed in some way. And, not just customers, but the people that we employ all over the world. We've got people, who we employ in Brazil, in Hungary, Netherlands, Ireland, UK, Canada now as well. Wow. Seeing how we've, some little thing that we were discussing in the Schoolhouse Hotel 10 years ago has essentially changed their lives, for short or long term. That's incredibly rewarding, knowing that, no one else has really helped us along the way. Everything's come from, discussions we've had, work that we've put in. That's something that is very rare, very hard to get to, but extraordinary rewarding.
I can feel the emotion from you as you're describing it. No, it's great. And as I said, you've got some big competitors out there that have raised some pretty big rounds in the last kind of couple of years, and here you've got Loylap, this Irish business that's been around for 10 years with customers you mentioned in the States and everything else. How hard does it become then to compete with direct competitors that have unicorn status, over 100 million raise? You know, how is that?
Yeah, I mean, you look at our business, and it's, you know, we have this conversation internally often. I mean, we're talking, you know, weekly, you know, monthly at the very most, is, you know, how to refine, you know, our product set and our, you know, our idea. Like, we provide closed loop cashless payment systems, but it takes the form of many different products. And that means that if you look at any one of those individual products separately, there's always going to be a huge amount of competitors within that particular vertical. When you look at it more holistically, you know, like you say, we do have a couple of major competitors out there, like, you know, the likes of, you know, Flipdish, who you alluded to, you know, 100 million raised last year, about 9 months ago. You've got the likes of Yo-Yo Wallet in the UK. Again, they've raised about, I can't remember exactly, I think it's about 30 million US dollars equivalent. And you know, you look at these guys, you look at the product set. I'm obviously biased, but, you know, our product, you know, blows everyone else out of the water. From my perspective, I think we provide a lot more functionality. You know, it's much slicker, it's much more robust, and we've done it on a fraction of the budget with a fraction of the people. And the important thing about this is that for us, this represents stability, right? Yeah. We know where we've come to, what we've come through to get here. We know what it's taken, and, you know, we know for a fact that we are going to be around in the future. And, you know, that's a really good thing from our perspective. I mean, I look at, you know, I don't want to speak to competitors' revenues and stuff like that, but you know, I look at the general model of, you know, raising money. I mean, you raise a lot of money from a VC, you're going to be locked into commitments, and they're going to be tranches of money that come in. And if you miss those goals, your money is gone. And at the end of the day, that's going to be the difference of you doing a down round, which is, you know,
we're seeing a bit of that at the moment.
We're seeing a lot of that at the moment. Yeah. And I mean, we're, you know, arguably at the, you know, at a sort of turning point and probably a little bit of a tech recession. You know, you look at, you know, the big headlines at the moment, Twitter, you know, potentially laying off up to 70% of their workforce. You know, you've got, you know, the likes of Flipdish, you know, laying off people again within a year of raising 100 million. You know, these are all signs that we can see. I mean, for us and for our people, you know, our people are kind of our commitment. They're our responsibility. You know, we have, you know, the data, you know, to know where the market is going. And I mean, coming out of COVID was amazing for our particular business. Yeah. Anyone in the sort of ordering space, particularly curbside pickup, order to table, that kind of became standard across the restaurant cafe industry over the course of COVID. And, you know, we saw how that grew exponentially within, you know, probably towards the end of COVID and then coming out of COVID. And then once everything opened up again, we saw how that kind of plateaued and even fell. And from our perspective, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference because we've never overstretched ourselves. For bigger businesses, I can see how that's going to be a major problem coming down the line. And there are going to have to be, I mean, decisions made, not by us, hopefully, but
touch wood.
And, you know, we're sort of here to kind of capitalize on that. And I mean, we have the staying power. The flip side of that is that, you know, to an extent, you know, we don't necessarily have that kind of headline status, you know, that a lot of people look out for. And, you know, we have over 5 million users of our platform, and probably less than half of them know they're even using our system.
Just quietly going about your business.
Pretty much. And I mean, you know, like I said, you know, we are a B2B business, and ultimately we sell through partners. You know, you look at the acquiring model. First Aid in the US have about 5,000 salespeople on the street. They're an acquiring bank. They have a very small tech industry. Same can be said about a lot of the acquirers around, you know, Ireland, the UK, Canada, you know, everywhere else. These guys are sales organizations. We are, you know, a tech software development company. We do our thing very, very well, and we rely on partners like, you know, like the acquirers to actually sell our services. And that's a really, symbiotic relationship that serves us very well. And it means that we, just have to sell to one person. It might be a much harder sale to get on board with an acquiring bank, to train their sales team, et cetera. But once we get out there, you have the likes of an acquiring sales entity like that with the feet on the street and the ability to scale it in a much bigger way than we would even be able to do if we had 100 million in the bank.
Yeah. Okay. So look, I mean, taking all that into account, and we can look at, say, teamwork.com, bootstrapped, I think, for 14 years, and they took on 70 million in funding not long ago.
Yep.
Is there a point where you can see Loylap doing the same thing, or are you bootstrapped till I die?
I think you have to remain flexible. Otherwise, you have to be open to things. Right now, you can always do with more money, right? In terms of our goals, what we want to do is, I suppose, make our business more global. We don't want to be as locked to the different regions that we are. And that requires, I suppose, building out a product set that isn't as reliant on technical partners as it is. And in terms of that growth strategy, Ireland is a great market, but there's only 5 million people here.
Yeah.
It's never going to be a big market for software. It's a very challenging market to get into, but it's never going to be hugely profitable. If you're building software, in Ireland, you have to build it for outside of Ireland. And I mean, this is, again, it feeds back to EI. Like, they will only fund you if you are an export opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, their goal is to make Ireland, to put Ireland on the map business-wise. In the same way for us, I mean, our goal is to make our software stateless, borderless even. And to be able to do that, we will be able to do it bootstrapped. It will take us longer than if we had a war chest.
Okay.
And so I'm not writing anything off. Maybe we end up going down that route. I suppose one of the benefits is that we don't have to. Slow and steady wins the race sometimes, but it would be nice to have that bigger footprint. And again, in the software space, as much as people talk about IP, it's very easy to replicate anything. And I mean, I could go out and build Facebook tomorrow. It could be just as good as Facebook, but it's not going to win because Facebook already have the market. Yeah. So sometimes it's a matter of getting there first and doing it really well. And that, for me, would be the driver behind, I suppose, looking again at funding, would be how can we access markets quickly? We have all the infrastructure in place. Some of the things that you don't think about when you're a developer or an engineering nerd, you don't think about customer support. You don't think about onboarding. Mm-hmm. You don't think about accounting. You don't think about billing. You think about, the product that you're giving. But without all those ancillary functions of your business, it's never going to work. And I mean, we're at a point where we have all of that in place. We have an extraordinary team who work really well together, and we have a structure there that we can copy and paste anywhere in the world. And that took us a really long time to get here, and we've done it extremely efficiently. And I think that kind of that's to our benefit. And I think probably if we were to raise money, that's probably what we would end up doing, is trying to figure out how to get it into new markets, engage with new partners in anywhere. I don't know, Australia, Vietnam, who knows?
Yeah. Okay.
And that's kind of, I suppose, success for us in the future.
That was my last question.
Well, okay.
What is
beat you to it?
Yeah, vision, success. Like, let's look at Loylap in 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. But what does it look like to you in terms of success?
I mean, like I said, I think being borderless is a huge thing for us, because that's essentially our ceiling right now, is that we're limited to the places where we can operate within the regulatory framework and within the hardware infrastructure
Do you
framework.
need a payments license to operate?
We don't, specifically because we're a closed loop system.
Okay.
The exposure of our payments network is just limited to the business.
Sure.
Where your money is essentially loaded. I mean, if you look at the nuts and bolts of our system, ultimately what we've built is a system where there are loads of different little banks inside of it, and every merchant is a bank. You put your money into that merchant, you spend it in that merchant.
Yeah.
You cannot put it into one merchant and spend it in another place.
Okay.
And that allows us to operate within an EU regulatory framework under a limited network exemption, which is hugely important to our business, and allows us to do a lot more with the money that we have in our system for merchants than we would be allowed to do, or that even like MasterCard and Visa would be allowed to do, and that sort of thing.
Brilliant. Well, Conor, it's been a pleasure, mate. Thanks very much for coming in, and again for going through your story, and obviously congrats to you, Paddy, the rest of the team on a hugely successful 10 years, and let's see where the next 10 goes.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great to chat.
Thanks, mate.